There are things that I would like to bring to your attention today. Once again, the title of the message is The Seventh Heaven, or Why God Hides. Kind of a strange title. But let's do it this way. At the beginning of the book, we have a single seven at the beginning of the book. And we are carried forward in just a few verses that in the beginning God created, and we go through this special creation that is described here at the beginning of the book of life on this rock, on this planet. And God made trees and fish and flowers and birds and all kinds of things, living things on this planet, and then He made a man and a woman. And it says God rested on which day? Seventh day. At the beginning of this book, we have 1-7. When we get to the end of this book, the book of Revelation, how many sevens do we have? The sevens are multiplied and multiplied and multiplied. When we get into the sanctuary, way back here, we go from 1-7 to what else in the sanctuary? Come on. 7 years, seventh day Sabbath, 7 candles on the candlestick, and the sevens begin to multiply, don't they? And when we get to the end of this book, we just have sevens running out our ears. What's going on? If you go to a good Bible commentary, Bible dictionary commentary, and look up 7 in the Bible, the idea is that 7 speaks of completeness, totality. Something is done and it's whole. And I've had to wonder, and I still do, if when God came to this little rock and this little world and decided to put life on it and decided to put images that look like Him, let's make man in our image after our likeness, I just wonder if God wasn't creating His seventh heaven, His everything that He wanted, everything that He ever wanted. Let's do it another way. If you are royalty in Europe for many centuries, you had a castle where you went in the springtime, and you had a castle where you went in the fall, and you had a winter castle, and you had a summer castle, and you had a castle, and you had... What's that all about? Well, we got money to burn, so let's burn it. No, there's more to it than that. There's more to it. There is something going on here on this rock that causes me to wonder if God didn't have many castles out there, all kinds of castles, but He has this dream home. He has this one day I'm going to build the house I really want. One day I'm going to have... You see, this becomes even more intriguing because one wonders if God didn't come to this seventh heaven once a week, because that's when He showed up, on the seventh day. And you can find that rather quickly in Genesis 4. And it came to pass at the end of the days, they were to come and bring their offerings and meet with God. The Sabbath, even in our understanding, has something to do with we're going to meet with God and God's going to meet with us. So I have to wonder if this seventh heaven, if this palace that God came here to build, and by the way, if you should ever get a trip to Europe and you go to some of these royal estates, these palaces, they are always replete with these incredible gardens. And God planted a garden eastward in Eden, it says. See? So in my wondering, I'm wondering if there was not something very, 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 very special about this rock and God coming here and turning it into His seventh heaven, the one He's going to visit once a week. That's an incredible thought. The universe is a big place. And if God says, I'm going to go visit that one and that one and that one and that one and that one, He just never runs out of that ones to visit. But if He's going to come here as often as once a week, something special is going on. Well, maybe He doesn't come here every week. Maybe every world out there keeps the Sabbath, and maybe everybody in the whole universe is worshiping at the same time. I'm sure that's possible. I'm not convinced that's the case. Maybe on that world, their Sabbath day is here, and that Sabbath day is there, and there, and there, so that there's a 24-hour, 365 worship of God and praise of God through His whole creation. That possibility certainly exists. But something was going on here. This end of the book, in the book of Revelation, is about the coming together of all these sevens. Whatever these sevens really mean and imply through the sanctuary and through the Bible, they seem to all come together in this book of Revelation. Last Sabbath we talked about God hiding and some of the reasons that He went into hiding, and I have 7 reasons why I believe God went into hiding at the beginning of this book and comes out of hiding at the end of this book. And I don't want to go to number 1 first. I want to go to number 2 as a reminder. And we, I think, dealt with this sufficiently, that God hid Himself because they were naked. And the Bible actually says that God hath, your sins have separated between you and your God, and God has hidden His face from you. He's turned His back to you. God does not want to see our nakedness. And we covered this. There are numerous verses in the Scripture about this. And the first thing God did in the garden, when He got there and discovered they didn't have any clothes on, the first thing He did was put clothes on them. And He said, I'm not sending you out of here without clothes on. This was a reflection, and would be a reflection, on God Himself, to create these people and then leave them with no clothes on. We talked about this. We said that the Bible over and over again speaks of God hiding His glory, and He had to do this because without that initial covering of light that our first parents enjoyed, they had no protection from the glory and majesty of God. They would be wiped out. That's what God told Moses. Remember on the mountain, Moses, you don't understand. You can't look at me and live. And Jesus said that. No man hath seen God at any time. He dwells in a light that no man can approach unto. You can't do it. And yet, the end of this book is, I will be their God, they will be my people, and they will see me face to face. Something has to change, obviously. Something big has to change for God to come out of hiding. Because when He does leave heaven to come here out of hiding, we took note in Revelation chapter 6 that the wicked, the chief captains, the mighty men, the high, the low, the rich, the poor, the everybody, they start crying, fall on us, rocks and mountains, and hide us from what? The face of Him that comes. So there are reasons why God is in hiding in the Bible. 1, He hides Himself, He turns His face away from our nakedness. 2, he hides his glory because he cares about us. You remember on the mountain he told Moses, you instruct the people, don't try to look up on the mountain and look through the clouds. Don't even let the animals break loose and touch the mountain. See? Because God is all-powerful. And when he comes even near, strange things begin to happen. Trees catch on fire with a different kind of fire. They burn without burning up. Strange things happen when God gets too close. People like Moses can become irradiated and come down off the mountain and not even know that they've been irradiated and glowing. And the people down below said, Moses, cover your face. Whatever shining was emanating from his face was such that they didn't want to even look at it. Painful, see. There are reasons why God hides. One thing that I want to build a bit on, we touched on last week, is that God hides his plans for victory. We talked about some things that happened even as recent as World War II and the deception that the Allied forces practiced on the Germans to get them to believe that we're going to invade here, Pas-de-Calais, and not down here at Normandy, and on and on and on. You do not want your enemy to know what your plans are. And Satan is, pardon me, Satan is a bright individual. And when Genesis 3:15 was pronounced and the promise given of a Messiah, a Savior to come, he has begun looking, watching, listening for any signal out of heaven that something is about to happen. He anticipated the birth of Jesus down 4,000 years later, because God had let some of his plans out, you see. Information that the enemy can use against you. And if he is a wise, good enemy, if there's no contradiction in those terms, then he will use your own plan against you. It happens all the time. So God, in his wisdom, hides his plan for victory so that Satan and Satan's legions down here don't have all the scoop. And I think we touched on this, but we need to do it again. If God, through the prophets, had named nations and had named kings and had named persons and so forth, well, now Iran is going to do this instead of saying Persia. And the papacy is going to do this, and the Pope is going to say that. And the President of the United States is going to do this. If God had been this open and this specific through the prophecies, then human beings would spend every effort trying to defy what God says is going to come to pass. It's just the nature of sin and rebellion. So there are good reasons why God hides from us. We need to test the motives of our own hearts, and God needs to test our motives. We don't like that idea. I don't. But it's necessary. Elder C.D. Brooks had a favorite saying that, and Judy, you help me fill in the blanks, that the sinful human nature demands the discipline of trial. That's it. He liked to say that. And he liked to say it because it's true. He liked to say it because people need to get that into their brains, that tough things come along in life Well, I just don't know why God doesn't just step right in and make life a bed of roses for me. Well, because it's not a bed of roses for Him. Does that make any sense? We get to sleep a few hours a night. He never sleeps. We can only hear and see the misery around us. He sees and hears it all. It's nonstop. And so God needs to test motives. I don't know that God is testing. He is making it possible for us to test our own motives. For us to look in the mirror sometimes along the way of life and say, I really am like that. I really did do that. I really did think that. I really did, It's a strange thing about sin that it blinds people to reality, especially their own reality. It doesn't blind them to sin. They can still see everything the neighbor does and everything that neighbor does, but when they look in the mirror, they just see this wonderful image of perfection and uprightness. Well, the Bible says every man is right in his own eyes. That's the idea, okay? If I believe it, it's true. And if I believe it, it's because I'm so smart that I could never make a mistake. See? And this is the way humanity operates, all of us. This is the way the planet is run. So God at least provides opportunities in this life for us to test our motives. And if you're following through this book of Galatians and these excellent Sabbath school lessons, the idea is somewhere in your life, hopefully, prayerfully, you and I discover that, hey, I can't do it. I can't. And if it's going to be done, who does it? God does it. God performs it. It was God who made me, and I am not going to remake myself. It's just not possible. I'm already broken. How can something that is broken remake itself into perfection? I mean, the whole notion is nonsensical. So there's a need to test motives, whether it's God testing or God making it possible for us to see ourselves. And that's what the law is all about. It shows us. The law doesn't save us. The law simply shows us how lost we really are, how sinful we really are. It's a strange thing, because if you read Ellen White along these lines, she says that the angels in heaven before this rebellion broke out didn't even know there was a law. They didn't even know that such a law existed. We get Adam and Eve in the garden and we get this one thing about the tree. Now don't go there and don't touch that and don't eat that. But beyond that, what law is there? You can't find the 10 Commandments in Genesis, first 3 chapters of Genesis, but every commandment is right there. Every one of them. And the New Testament enlarges upon this and says, whoever breaks one breaks the whole law. The end result is the same. It doesn't matter if you break 1 or 10. It doesn't matter if you break it 1 time or 1,000 times. If you break it 1 time, you're broken. Not just the law, but you are broken, see. We are waiting on God. The question is, what is God waiting on? Well, that depends on who you listen to. There are a lot of folk who believe that God is waiting for us to get perfect, and when we get perfect, Jesus will come. Well, if we can get perfect down here, what need is there for Jesus to come? These are silly ideas, silly notions. And God is not holding up heaven or any part of heaven waiting on flawed human beings. Let me assure you of that. I think the saying is, time and tide wait for no man, and I can assure you God is not waiting on men. There is a time. Now I want to bring you back to number 1 so that I can get to number 7. Strong men don't cry in public places. Why would God hide? Because He is the strong man. And is He going to be seen on the throne of heaven and the whole of creation crying? And that can't be. Psychologically, that cannot be. You cannot allow this to happen, because if God can't handle it, who am I? But I'm going to suggest to you that God went into hiding to cry privately. And I'm going to take you into the book of Revelation to show you and prove to you in the Word that this is the case. Why don't we go to the 8th chapter of Revelation for a moment and have a look at this. I think you've probably wondered about this as many times as I have, but it's in the book, Revelation 8, verses 1 and 2. And when He had opened the 7th seal, who is the He that opens the seals? It's Christ. He's come into the judgment scene in heaven. And when He had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Sometimes businesses, sometimes nations, organizations want to remember a loss. Our president has died. We bring the flag down to half-mast and we declare a moment of silence in Congress, and we declare a national 1 minute of silence as we remember the passing of this great man. Do you have any idea how long a half hour of silence is? I have people who turn this into weeks and months and all of that. No. It's a half hour. If you've never been in total darkness or in total silence, you cannot appreciate what total silence for a half hour really bespeaks. I mean, no sound. Nothing. I go out in the garden, and if I go out early in the morning, I really appreciate walking early in the morning out there because it's so quiet. And then you hear an airplane, and you hear birds, and you hear a little wind rustling the dead leaves on the tree, and you begin to recognize that there is no such thing as quiet, total silence. It doesn't exist. Yes, it does. The desert helps, but you usually get a wind that whistles on the rocks or something. Total silence, total darkness, total whatever. There was silence where? In heaven, about the space of half an hour. I've wondered, what is this silence all about? Well, look at the second verse, please. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And if you just keep reading now, they are given permission one by one to blast their trumpets, and when they do, millions of people die. Millions of people are exterminated. Millions and millions and millions of people are exterminated, as it were, in a moment of time. Do you think that something like this would happen and God would treat it lightly, flippantly, oh well, go ahead and sound and wipe out 30 million over there and 130 million over here. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think something is going on here. And the context is the 7 plagues. And if you'll go to chapter 15 with me, we'll see where the plagues are going to be poured out. I'm in Revelation 15 and verse 5, and I want you to see this. You can't miss this. I want you to see it's the same context. After that I looked, behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened, and the 7 angels came out of the temple having the 7 plagues. This is the same moment as verse 2 in chapter 8. 15 and verse 6. I want you to see this. And the 7 angels came out of the temple having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, and having their breasts girded with golden girdles. And one of the 4 beasts gave unto the 7 angels 7 golden vials full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. And verse 8 puts it all together. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from His power, and no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. So what I'm asking you to see in verse 8 is that there is this moment, there's this private moment in the throne room of heaven in which nobody is allowed to come in. Go out and close the door. Everyone out of my presence. There's this silence in heaven. And what is it about? It's not silence on that planet or that one or that one or that one. It's silence in heaven. What is it about? It's God closing the door and pushing everybody out so He can cry in private. So let's try and liken this to some human experience, something that we can at least relate to, because you can't relate to God on His throne and God and His glory and God in private, and we certainly cannot relate to God crying. We can't. Maybe if we back up, just in our remembrance, in our memory banks, if we back up a bit to Jesus hanging on the cross, we come to a certain hour of the afternoon, a certain hour of the day, and something begins to happen in the natural realm. Jesus is still alive. He's hanging on the cross. But what begins to take place? A darkness, a supernatural darkness begins to come. And it begins about noon, it says. And for several hours there is this darkness. What is that all about? What caused it? If it's supernatural, then it's not natural. Something brought about this darkness. Now, we can try this possibility on, that the Father has turned His back on His own Son and hidden His face from Him. As a matter of fact, I think that's what was going on. Yes, yes. God can hide from you and me as sinners. That's one thing, to hide Himself from His own flesh and blood, from His own Son, from His own kin, who was totally innocent, totally without fault, totally undeserving. Why would He do such a thing? Well, it's not only that. Jesus had to be left alone. And God had to be left alone. the house is being divided. See? And Jesus himself predicted his own death, and he said, a house divided cannot stand. He's predicting his own death. When he is separated from his Father, he is separated from life. If we go through Scripture with our eyes and our senses, I think, in tune with what's going on here, there are reasons why God hides. And I believe there were private, this is just personal, I believe there were private, quiet moments in heaven when Lucifer turned his back on God and went out through the whole of heaven to stir up trouble and mischief and to tell all these lies about God. I believe God's heart trembled within him because he could see where it was going and what it was going to bring about and how long it would take to bring an end to this suffering and this misery. See? Now, if you're a parent, there is nothing more painful to a parent than the cry of hurt and pain of a child, their child. There's nothing. You can hear children crying and it's painful. You can see suffering and it's painful. But if it's your own flesh and blood, it's a different story. You'll see the strongest man melt. Oh Lord, he cries out, oh Lord, let it be me, not my child, not my son, not my daughter. Let it be me instead, see. We've heard human suffering, seen it, experienced it. We know something about it. But what does God sound like crying? What does God sound like suffering? If God is in pain, do we hear him moaning? Is there anybody out there who can tune in on it and say, I think I hear him crying? See? The disciples weren't very good at tuning in. Jesus was lying on the ground and he was about to have life snuffed out of him before he ever got to the cross, and the disciples were sound asleep. They weren't tuning in. I think the closest we can come to somebody recognizing there was a Roman soldier and there was a thief. And the Roman soldier said what? Truly what? This was the Son of God. And what did the thief say? No, he said, Lord, say, remember me. He recognized that somebody was there, very different. We have a record in the Bible of Jesus on the cross, and he was in horrible pain. We're talking about at the physical, fleshly level. He was in horrible pain. There is nothing worse than crucifixion. Okay? For bodily pain. The body is racked from head to toe. That's what the story of Job was all about. You can touch him from head to toe, but you can't kill him. Why did God keep the devil from killing Job? Because he reserved the right to kill Jesus himself. That's what was going on with Abraham and Isaac up there on the mountain. Abraham, take the knife. But he wouldn't allow him to do it. No. God will provide. God is the one who does this. God is the one who will pay the price, experience the pain, because the pain is unspeakable, because the pain is, there are no words. So I believe the number one reason God went into hiding in the garden was a mirror of an experience he had when sin began in heaven. And now he could see his seventh heaven going into ruin. He could see the house, the castle, and every perfect thing in the garden he planted. He could see it all going to ruin. He could see the end from the beginning. And somewhere, maybe on the throne, maybe in a closet, somewhere, I believe that God wept when Adam and Eve fell into the bait, fell into the trap, took the bait, fell into the trap. And at the personal level, I believe there will be crying when the time comes for God to work justice on sinners. I believe God will go into a quiet, private place and cry. I believe that. Nobody comes in. You go pour out the plagues, leave me alone. Nobody could go in, it says, until the plagues had been fulfilled. The work had been done. Now there's one more moment, I believe, when God is going to cry. And it's the seventh reason God goes into hiding. We get an echo of it in the story of David and his son Absalom. So a quick reminder, David is the great king. And he has this handsome son. He's beautiful, and men are not beautiful, but Absalom was beautiful. Oh, all the hair, the whole business. He was handsome. The same thing is said of Lucifer, your brightness has corrupted you. The same thing was said of Saul. He was tall, blonde, and handsome. It was his ruin. See, Absalom is a beloved son. And he's rotten to the core. He's not only turning his back on his own flesh and blood, his father, but he has every intention of killing his own father, murdering his own father. He has every intention of taking the throne for himself. And David is so wrapped up in the fact that Absalom is his own flesh and blood and his own son and his own whatever, that he gives orders to the soldiers in the army, when you find him, don't you kill him, don't you hurt him, you bring him to me. And if you haven't really followed these stories through in the Bible, Absalom gets caught, not by the soldiers, but by what? How does Samson get in trouble? This story is told in Esther. Haman builds this great scaffolds and finds himself hanging on his own scaffold. See, this is Absalom, and his own beauty hangs him. Now the story has wonderful merit as far as I'm concerned. Not because of Absalom getting his just deserts, but because we hear David crying. We hear him crying and lamenting. We hear David, and it says he was heard throughout the palace. He's heard. Everybody hears the king crying. They hear the strong man. Oh, Saul kills his thousands, but David his 10,000s. No. Here's the king. Here's the strong man, and he is crying. Do you remember what he cried out loud? Anybody? Come on. Without looking it up, tell me what he cried. Oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son Absalom. Would to God that I had died for thee. And I believe that's a picture of God when he has to take the life force out of Lucifer at the end. How close was Lucifer to God? First of his creation. First. How close was he to God? He stood next to the throne of God. How many centuries, how many millennia, how many whatever, we can't know. Not here. Maybe on the other side we'll begin to get the rest of the story. But he was there. He rejoiced in the presence of God. God loved him. Everything was harmony. Everything was peace. Everything was right. Until the day, it says, until the day that iniquity was found in you. And as soon as he ate that forbidden fruit and decided to hold on to it, so we can point to Adam and Eve, and we can point to the history of mankind, and we can say, well, there's about 6,000 years, and we got another 1,000 to wait for the last cleanup in this thing. But how many thousand, quotes, years between the rebellion in heaven and the rebellion in the garden? We don't know. We don't know. All we know is that God never sleeps, and no one of his children is pained except he feels the pain. No one of his children cries except he hears the cry. And I can't fathom that. But I want to read this verse 8 one more time. The temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter into the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were fulfilled. If you and I can ever catch a vision of a God who has feelings, just like we have feelings, except at the divine dimension, we feel pain. What kind of pain does divinity feel? I don't know. I don't know. But I believe there is pain at all levels, including the highest level in heaven. I can't help but believe this. The question is, did God create this special 7th heaven to be able to go in peace and solitude and have communion with family that looked like him? Well, he looks just like his daddy. And it's wonderful when the children behave the way daddy and mom want them to behave. But if they misbehave, it's a different story. See? So here's the touchstone. Here's the capstone, and don't miss it. You can go through the Bible and the 7s begin to add up and stack up and multiply 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7s. But if you will go through the Bible, you will also find that suddenly there's an 8th, and there's an 8th, and there's an 8th, and there's an 8th. I have a good friend out in Texas who is doing not only this research on the 8th in the Bible, but is writing a book on it. Found so much information in the Bible on this concept, there is an 8th, that she's actually writing a book. So let me sum up in simple terms for you what the 8th in the Bible is all about. The 8th means a new beginning. And is it possible that God created a 7th heaven, and because it was defiled and ruined and broken, that God is now planning to build an 8th heaven? A new heaven and a new earth, where the former things are passed away. I believe so. I believe so. On the 8th day, a male child is circumcised. On the 8th day, the mother who's given birth is declared clean. Pentecost is the 8th day. And all of this comes together in some grand, awful, terrible, horrible collision at the end when the 8th wickedness is formed. The woman who sits on the beast, and the beast is Babylon, and the woman is Babylon, and there is this unholy marriage. She sits, it says, on 7 hills, on 7 mountains. And there are 7 fivefold. One is yet to come, and the 8th is like or of the 7. If 7 is perfection, 8 is perfect wickedness in the prophecies. And it will be followed by an 8th heaven. I believe it. I can't help but see it in the book. And I think I can speak for you when I say I sure want to be in the 8th heaven. The 7th has not been heaven. It might have started that way. It has not continued that way. You and I are a byproduct of this wonderful plan to have a 7th heaven. Garden and all. Palace and all. Temple and all. And because it was marred and because it was broken, we are experiencing the pain and the anguish, but so is God. And the wonderful thing about this story is that at the end of it, God cleans it up, cures it up, removes it all, and builds brand new on the ashes. Brand new. Father in heaven, we're thankful that somewhere along the way in our lives we came to meet Jesus. Somewhere along the way we became aware that you are and that we are, that you are righteous and we are not. And the farther we travel along the road of life, the more that is wrong and incomplete and unlawful and unholy in our lives. We begin to see ourselves as we are, flawed and broken. And we long for heaven. We long for a place where there is absolute peace, where there is harmony, where there is no more pain, no more suffering, and no more crying. Not on the part of men, not on the part of angels, and certainly not in the throne room of heaven. Please bless each one of us and our loved ones with us, that we may be part of your new heaven and new earth. I pray it and I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.